should we, what Apple was clearly going for is all of this capability is in this very small, thin device.
Yeah.
Not necessarily what was interpreted.
Well, I'm going to read 2 viral tweets from an X user named James Clark. He says, tweet number 1, Apple's new Crush ad is a visual and metaphorical bookend to its 1984 ad. In 1984, a monochrome, conformist, industrial world is exploded by a colorful, vibrant human. In 2024, colorful, vibrant humanity is crushed by monochrome, conformist, industrial press. And then tweet number 2, he follows up, says, I can't believe how bad this is. If I was a rival brand and wanted to create a parody ad as a protest at what Apple has become in 2024, I couldn't come up with better. Incredible. And I read those tweets only because that is the universal sentiment in the wake of this Apple advertisement. So do you agree that it's a disaster? And if so, why do you hate it?
Well, I do want to start by talking about myself. In that this ad irritated me in the presentation. Now, part of the problem was the presentation happened when I was in bed. So I was still writing actually, because I forgot I was super late that day. And so I was catching up to record Dithering and get ready for it. And the very end of the pressing, there's a little emoji that rolls away and is on the edge, and he like looks terrified as he's getting pressed, and then he explodes. Yeah. And I'm like, WTF? Like, I could not believe they just did that. And then I was just, I was so focused on getting Dithering out. And then when I was writing about it, I kind of wanted to make this sort of broader TV point. I wanted to revisit one of my old articles about the tragic iPad and sort of say, you know what? The iPad's fine. It is what it is. That I totally forgot to write about that moment. And then for my sake, I get on Twitter and everyone's going on about it. I'm like, I felt that too. Why did I write about that? Total missed opportunity. So I'm very irritated at myself, to be totally honest. But yeah, no, it bothered me in the moment. And it's funny because like I said, the emoji is what really got me. It's like you
don't have to murder an emoji.
That's don't murder the emoji.
Really good point.
Like the emojis,
that is
right?
The tipping point where it becomes creepy.
I mean, but the broader point, so there's a sort of yes, I do think it is an absolute disaster, and the reason it's an absolute disaster is because of the truth embedded in it. There's that saying from, I think it's Bill Gates, we underestimate we overestimate what can happen in 2 years and underestimate what can happen in 10. Well, we are, if we want to go back to 1984 and that commercial that was created for the Mac, we're not talking about 10 years, we're talking about 40 years. And when you step back, broadly speaking, and think about the impact of tech, Apple wants you to think about the positive idea, this idea that all these capabilities, what was the monetary value of everything that was crushed? Very high, right? Like, I mean, you get all this capability and all this power in one device. It's sort of the democratization of creation. It's the thing that I loved about sort of that iPad 2 introduction, where everyone can make music now. And that is almost certainly the mindset with which Apple was approaching this ad. But when you step back and you think about sort of, popular culture broadly over the last 40 years, you think about sort of world culture broadly. And the reality is there has been a great flattening. As someone that sort of lives abroad, that has traveled all over the world, what are the reasons? I mean, I still travel more than the average person for sure. I also, to some extent, have less interest than before, in part because a lot of places are the same. And part of it is just I'm old and lazy, right? To find the truly interesting stuff, you have to really sort of work for it. If you want just a nice vacation, everywhere is kind of the same. And the implication, I don't want to say dark side, but the sort of just the reality of the democratizing of access is this sort of flattening effect that is sort of a real thing. And you see in things like aggregators, and what's the implication of an aggregator? What's the implication of getting a strategic advantage by controlling demand? It's that you completely commoditize supply. There's like the goal, all the incentives is to fit in, to be like everything else, and to sort of beat the algorithm, sort of, as it were.
Yep.
And that is, you end up with stuff that's all the same. You end up with the biggest stars today are people that happen to be stars 10, 15 years ago, and then can thus carry through. You want to talk like the Taylor Swift effect or something along those lines, in the fact that we probably will never have a star like that again. We'll have more stars because there's so many niches and everyone can be a star in their own category. But the universalism of sort of that moment last summer is part and parcel of Swift just being around for a long time, and being around in the pre-total. It's interesting because this flatness is the high level is flat. Underneath, it's total sort of everything split up into niches. There's no universalism. So it's like the perception of one single blob and the experience of almost more isolation. This is the again, sort of the dark side of tech in many respects, and the dark side of globalization, all of which is a tech story sort of in its own right. Maybe not an IT one so much. Things like containers, things like supersonic airline, or not supersonic, they're subsonic, but transcontinental airlines, or flying over the ocean, all these sorts of things. And what this ad did, in a far more powerful way than any essay could, or sort of anything else, is give you a 60-second encapsulation of the frustration and angst that everyone feels. And in that regard, it was brilliant. It was a brilliant ad. It was just a brilliant ad that is not necessarily in Apple's interests.
Yeah, it's definitely not in Apple's interest. I'm waiting to see whether it gets pulled off of Tim Cook's Twitter account at some point, because that's how
the first thing I did was
visceral
grab the ad,
hatred
was download it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm actually surprised. I thought by the time I woke up today it would be taken down, but it's still
Right.
there. We'll see what happens.
I mean, I will be honest, I didn't hate it as much as everyone else. I saw the ad when I was prepping for Sharp China, and there were a few of our friends tearing into it in our tech group chat, and I was busy, so I didn't have the time to chime in and disagree. But to me, if you want to read the ad with the absolute worst faith possible, then sure, it's a powerful metaphor for a company that's crushing humanity. I am not a fan of Apple whatsoever, so I understand that reading, but purely as an ad, just aesthetically, I'm not going to say it was good, but I understand what they were going for, and I didn't have the overwhelming reaction that seemingly everyone else had.
Did you see the person who put the ad in reverse?
No, I didn't.
So they basically just played the ad as it was, but did it in reverse. So you start with this super thin iPad, and then you expand out into all these things. It is powerful. It's a great ad.
What life used to be. Yeah.
Again, this is no, not that. It actually delivers the idea that within this device, you get all this capability, right? It went in the opposite direction. And
a simple fix for Apple.
It's one of the most brilliant ads of all time. It really, really is. And that sort of gets to it, because it captures the duality of what has happened over the last 40 years. And there are absolutely good sides, and there are absolutely bad sides. And the fact you can go in either direction captures that so brilliantly. Again, like, the reason that the ad is engendering such a response is because there is truth in it. It's not dishonest. It's not mean. It's stating a reality. And again, that reality runs in both directions. Everyone can make music. Like, that was Steve Jobs said that. Like, people want to paint this as some sort of, oh, if Steve Jobs was in charge sort of idea. This is the articulation of the vision he put forward for the iPad. It's not wrong.
Well, and it's a little bit ironic, because as far as commodifying all of human creativity, it's not really Apple that's doing that as much as companies like Facebook, Spotify, Netflix, Amazon's doing it to businesses. Like, Apple is the hardware that makes all that possible, but the hardware itself unlocks a lot of human creativity. It
Yeah,
is
no,
just a
it's a good
really
point. It's more an ad about tech in general, as opposed to
exactly.
necessarily like Apple specifically. That is a good distinction that I would agree with.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a flashpoint that is interesting because of what it says about big tech generally. I mean, it reminds me of what you wrote about Spotify and Joe Rogan years ago, where you were saying agree or disagree with Spotify's decision making regarding this controversy. The environment surrounding speech has shifted, and companies, from a strategic standpoint, need to be mindful of that as they make decisions. There's a similar dynamic here where the environment shifted without Apple realizing it, and they released this tone deaf ad that triggers a lot of what people don't like about the net impact of tech on society. And watching people just flip out for now going on like 16 hours is pretty interesting, you know?